Welcome, everyone, to the EUCannaJobs Potcast. We're thrilled to have you with us as we dive into the latest happenings in the European cannabis industry. I'm your host, Andy Mannsfeld, the founder of EUCannaJobs. We are dedicated to connecting European cannabis companies with people looking for their next great job or career in the industry. We work with entry level all the way up to executives and everyone in between. Today, we have an exciting guest, Rebecca Tapp. She started her career in cannabis in the U.S. back in 2016, then moved to the U.K. in 2021, and is now in Portugal with a company called Paralab Green. So she has extensive knowledge in multiple markets around the world. So we're excited to talk with her today. Thanks, Becca, for joining us.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Great. And thank you, everyone else, for joining us also again. Let's just jump in. Becca, tell me a little bit about how you got started back in 2016 in cannabis back in the US and then how you kind of ended up in the UK.
Yeah, of course. Cannabis has always been a part of my life. So it was an easy way to incorporate it. And I grew up on the West Coast of the United States. So I had many friends who would, go down to the Emerald Triangle and Humboldt during the summer and do trimming jobs. So I always had connections within that space. And as many of you know, it was medically legal quite early on. I believe California was in 1996. So it was always, in the community around where I was growing up. So as soon as legalization happened, so many jobs opened up. I started working for a promotional products company that was focusing on marketing in the cannabis space. They had already had a sector working on like traditional markets. So these are things like, logoed pins or stress balls or things you see at conferences. They opened up a cannabis division and we started attending all kinds of events from cannabis golf tournaments, to legislative events where we would talk about how to shape the policy within our community. There, I ended up meeting someone who was more focused on the laboratory equipment side. They were producing vacuum ovens and working with clients like NASA and JPL.
Oh,
And
wow.
we're finding interest from the cannabis space because there were, hydrocarbon producers using hydrocarbon extraction. They wanted to uh, get out all the butane and or propane in the product, and they use vacuum ovens for that. So we saw a need and developed a whole distribution channel of equipment focused on cannabis facilities. And that ultimately led to me working with a partner in the UK, moving over there and focusing on chemical reactors and their applications towards cannabis. So, more on the production side has been my journey.
Okay. Yeah, it's super interesting. How was it for you coming from the US and moving over to the UK? Like, was it difficult with visas? Obviously, language wasn't a barrier, but like visa and just the different ways of doing business and of living and things like that. How did you find that to be?
Yeah. So, from an employment point of view, moving to the UK from the US was much easier than my move to Portugal. With the UK, it was fairly simple because I had a really great immigration lawyer. That was something that I negotiated with the company that I was moving with to make sure that there was an immigration lawyer. We had many conversations about the nuances around the visa application process, which visa would be appropriate, what steps to take, which was really nice because it was really well laid out on what that would look like to go over to relocate from the US to the UK. So that's something I really suggest for people looking to break out of the US market and move it to the international market is do your research and find a good immigration lawyer. Um, as far as culturally, I mean, it was there were, it's English speaking country to English speaking country,
Yeah.
so it was much easier than our current transition. But, there were cultural differences to adjust to as far as for me, it was learning to take time off. Uh, you know, Immediately it was, you have 22 days off, not including bank holidays, which was a complete shock to me. I took 10 days for maternity leave. So to then go to having mandatory time off was quite an adjustment. But I mean, I was excited about that one.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the big things, that Americans a lot of times don't understand is the whole work-life balance that actually really exists in Europe. It's like a catchphrase in the US, but it's hard to find even at some of the best companies. And here it's just a given, or, it's also pretty typical here in Europe that you're not going to be answering emails 24/7 or your phone 24/7, and that people are not expecting you to be, answering your phone on your day off to answer work questions. But people from the U.S. just aren't used to that. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, and I'm a cancer survivor, and that's kind of part of my cannabis patient side of my journey. So for me to move over to the UK, it was really important to make sure that I would have access to my follow-up care that I would need.
Hmm.
It would actually end up being really beneficial because I had a rare type of cancer that there are only few specialists. I think there were two in all of the UK that were familiar with my cancer. And my test, because I was part of the NHS system, I had an NHS number. A test that would have cost me about $5,000 in the US was free in the UK and allows me to go longer without having any sort of test. So there's something to be said about the healthcare system too, even though it is very resource strained.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's true. But, throughout Europe, healthcare is considered a right and not a privilege. And even if, like you said, sometimes the resources are a little bit more strained, everyone does get taken care of, and just the cost differences are astronomical. I mean, in the U.S., you've got all these weird insurance rules where you pay a certain amount up front before they even kick in, and even after the insurance kicks in, you still pay 20, 30, 40% of all costs anyway. It's like, why do you even have insurance practically,
Yeah, exactly. I had insurance for when I had my son, and I think my C-section still cost 17,000 US dollars after insurance. So, it's just that differences. Those are the things that count though. I think those are what actually I add into that counterbalancing of, work life and what weighed into our decision on the trade-offs of, leaving home and the perks of, being working in my own country versus moving abroad and adjusting to other countries.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a big difference. Well, tell me. So then you moved to Portugal, and you were mentioning that you found it much more difficult doing that transition. Did you not move over with the company, or tell us how that went and why it was so much more difficult for you?
Yeah, so I did move over with the company. So after my contract ended in the UK, I had a partner that was already, I was working with on a distribution relationship, Paralab Green. I had already had a strong relationship with the CEO, Rui Soares. And, before I had mentioned to him, that my contract was ending and I was exploring other options, he had been talking to me about coming to work for Paralab Green. We wanted to remain in the UK. I have a small child. So for us, the idea of moving to Portugal and relocating when we kind of hadn't planned on being outside the US for more than like 3 years was a little daunting. He and I continued our conversations, and I was just too excited about the opportunity. And so we've recently relocated. We only moved here in April.
Oh, okay.
So I do have a company. I am being sponsored. Now, the challenge with that is more on the bureaucratic side. So the government in Portugal has recently changed over their the body handling immigration. So with that, I think right now they're experiencing a backlog of like 440,000 applications. And their employees working at these immigration centers are just really pushed to their limits right now. So
Oh,
there's, really extensive backlogs, visas being expired, but then extended for a year while expired. But in that time, we can't leave the country. It's so it's similar to the NHS resource strains. It's the resource strains are all over the world right now in different parts, and in Portugal they're feeling it on the immigration side for sure.
Yeah, I mean Germany's also, especially in Berlin, where I'm based. Yeah, the visa stuff. Because I'm actually on a visa. Also, I was actually born in Germany, but I have only a U.S. passport currently, and so I'm on a visa also. And mine expired in April and took until June to get an appointment, even to talk to them. During which time you're not allowed to travel out of the country and things. I had to miss a couple of trips I wanted to go on. Not the end of the world, but certainly annoying. And yeah, like you said, resource strained, and it's hard to see an end in sight for a lot of these issues, especially with the amount of immigration coming into Europe from all over, and just not enough workers in the governments to take care of these appointments.
Exactly. It's a global issue, and I think that I try to handle it with compassion and patience, because oftentimes when I go in to have these appointments, I'm having one after this call where I'm going and trying to get a step completed on my immigration checklist. I go in, I have a script in Portuguese where I first attempt to speak in their language. I always have a translator on speed dial in case I need it. And I go in with as much compassion and patience as possible, because this is a global issue and everyone is doing the best they can. But the more mobile our world is, this is only going to continue to increase as far as challenges go. And ultimately, it's going to be the government's responsibility for how they respond. And all we can do is control how we interact with these people.
Yeah, it's a very good point, because it's easy to get frustrated and you want to get mad at someone, but the person sitting there on the other side of you, they're just as frustrated, and in the end, you need their help more than they need your help. So
exactly, and maybe it's an opportunity to talk about how cannabis helps.
Yeah, true. How to deal with your anxiety and stress.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, interesting you mentioned that with Portugal. You know, uh, they decriminalized drugs there so many years ago. What, 20 years ago plus, I believe.
Yeah.
I know there's always misconceptions about that, especially coming from the U.S. What that means, and most people say it's legal. Everything's legal there, which it isn't. It's decriminalized. Same with, cannabis has not been legal in Holland either, even though everyone thinks it is. You want to talk a little bit about that, what your experience has been kind of with that, especially compared to the U.S. and UK and Portugal? And each place is different when it comes to this.
Yeah, of course. Before I moved from the US, that was one of the things that was really important, was making sure that, first of all, that the UK had a medical program, and that it wasn't going to be a medical program that, was incredibly challenging to gain access to my medicine, because that's how I, treated my recovery from cancer, was with CBD and THC. I didn't have any plans on getting on any, other pharmaceuticals. So I spent a lot of time researching the legality in the UK and within Europe. And that was really confusing to me. I had to, make spreadsheets to try to understand, because the information available, I mean, this was in 2020, the information was available was a lot less than there is today to understand the exact legality of it. So for me in the UK, I went and I had to really do some research, connect with some patient groups to understand what that looked like, because I knew it was medically available, but I didn't understand, was that medically available through the NHS or was that private? That wasn't something we really had to deal with in the US, so it was a new concept to me. So I went through the process of obtaining a prescription by getting in touch with a private clinic, going through, all those hoops, which a few years ago were much more complicated than they are now. A few years ago, they were really stern on having demonstrated 2 tried methods to be able to qualify. So you have to actually go to your GP ask your GP for a printout of your health summary of care. And for someone who's new to the country, I didn't have a healthcare summary. So, I reached out to my oncologist. I established care with the GP. I brought documents from home. And then you submit that. And what they do is then you have to, 3 years ago, you had to apply through a condition. You had to demonstrate that there was a condition that was applicable for cannabis as a treatment method, and also that you've tried other treatment methods for that particular condition. Now that's like jumping through a flaming hoop because, a lot of these conditions that people are using to treat cannabis are really broad, like there's a lot of different symptoms, especially for people with like endometriosis or fibromyalgia, which has a bunch of other symptoms that they don't really know what they're trying to treat. It's like whack-a-mole. So luckily that obstacle has been removed and they're a little bit more relaxed. As long as you can demonstrate that there is a need and provide a healthcare summary, you can gain access to cannabis as a prescription medicine in the UK. Moving to Portugal, that's been a little bit more confusing for me. I still have not quite worked through what it looks like to get a prescription here. That's something I'm still working through right now. But when we do have friends come to visit, they assume, oh, it's decriminalized. That means that you can just access it. I have friends who go to CBD shops that are buying God knows what. They're pretty sure it's cannabis, and they're convinced that it's legal because it's decriminalized here.
Yeah.
But that's not the case. It's decriminalized for personal use, and I believe it's up to 25 grams of flour and 5 grams of hash. And essentially, that's kind of the guidelines for it. But what it's supposed to equal out to is like a personal amount, like up to 10 days of personal amount for use. And then if you get caught first offense, it's generally, you get a warning most of the time. And then, but if you're a continuous offender, then you're looking at like, civil penalties, which are like fines, compared to the US where it's, oftentimes it results in an arrest.
Yeah.
So different penalties, which I find interesting because in the States, we're looking at 23, potentially I think a few more US states that allow adult use. And I think in 2022, there were 250,000 people arrested for cannabis possession. And 92% of those were for possession only, but we're not sure about the volume. So maybe it was, maybe it was a lot, but still it's just showing like, that the different approaches.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, it is interesting. Portugal, like you mentioned, has had it decriminalized, and Portugal, the government has been one of the biggest proponents of cannabis cultivation. The government, a lot of the countries here in Europe were saying, oh, we'll do a pilot project for a few years, see how it goes, and then evaluate. Portugal didn't do that with the cultivation. They said, no, we want this industry here. We're a good location for it. And they're very supportive as the government goes. Yet for their own medical cannabis and recreational is now being discussed, but even medical cannabis there, it's been difficult for people to access it. I don't remember the exact numbers, but the amount of medical cannabis sold within Portugal was a very tiny amount, less than 1,000 kilograms. But the amount exported is tens of thousands or something of kilos, or thousands of kilos at least. So, huge amounts being produced and exported, but very little actually being sold through the medical program there. Supposedly, from what I read, they're looking at making it easier, but especially for patients coming from somewhere else, that really makes it difficult because then you're kind of stuck in this limbo of, well, I guess now I have to go access it illegally in order to get my medical prescription. Basically, I have to go buy it on the black market now, which puts you at risk of running afoul with the law. Like you said, if you keep getting busted, then all of a sudden you start getting in more and more trouble. So it's unfortunate in that sense. What has your experience been down there with the legal side? With like I said, it's mainly a cultivation that's going on there. What have you been seeing with that?
Yeah, I have, like you said, I have plenty of friends who are working on the commercial production side and exporting it to countries that have medical programs. But I don't have any. I don't even know anyone that is that has prescription medical cannabis in Portugal. Now, I'm still new here, so I haven't made, a lot of friends in the community that are cannabis users, but it was much more abundant in the UK. I mean, even in the small village that I lived in, I didn't have to go far. I could smell it everywhere. I knew, my gardener was using it, my neighbor was using it. It was kind of everywhere. I haven't found that to be the case where I am, but that might be because I live in a primarily a tourist outside of a tourist town in the southern coast of Portugal. So maybe that's the reason. I'm not quite sure. When I do go to the beach that is more frequented by locals, I do see people who are sparking up a joint that are much more comfortable with it. I feel like than I have seen in the past, but it's not something that I have as much experience with here. And until I finish the process of residency and finalizing my visa, I haven't had any opportunity to really explore it from a prescription side. So, it's something that I definitely need to get on because it's part of my routine
Yeah.
here. But it's still a lot of unknowns and variables for me. And there doesn't seem to be as much information readily available like there was in the UK. In the UK, if you wanted it, there were a lot of information campaigns out, like by drug science and the different patient groups. So that was more readily available than I find in Portugal. In Portugal, it seems to be not a huge initiative on recruiting medical cannabis patients. From what I've seen, it looks like they primarily offer Tilray. They don't seem to have a lot of producers paying attention to this market just because it doesn't seem to have um, the demand as the UK does for
Yeah.
prescription cannabis. And maybe
Yeah.
that is because of the legality behind it. Doesn't seem like the police are too focused on it.
Yeah, but I mean, like I said, it's definitely the medical side there is definitely very, very small, especially like you said, compared to the UK or to Germany. How do you know how big is the UK market? Do you know?
So that's like the question that everyone wants to know, right? Because there is no official database where these clinics have to register and combine their numbers, and you see a lot of these um, marketing efforts coming out saying, "Oh, we have the most patients," or "We have the most patients." But you kind of just have to take that at their word because there's not any formal registry where this information is. There's no like database to my knowledge. So Professor Mike Barnes said at the 2023 Drug Science Patient Conference last November that there were 35,000. I've seen prohibition partners say that there's 45 or 50,000. It's really a moving target because from my experience looking at the patient groups and like different online boards there's a lot that kind of swing between their prescribed material and then their unregulated material that they're sourcing through their local cannabis clubs and stuff. So it seems to be supplemented. And I think that has to do with a lot with the cost and then the availability and the quality of what's on the market. So between UK and Germany, that seems to be where most of the markets focus because
Yeah.
they're the two largest markets. But
Right.
Germany, it's what 300 something thousand medical patients, and it's becoming easier every day. The UK between 35 and 50, yet I think there's 95 different cultivars on the market right now. There's more and more producers trying to enter the market every day, and it's a majority flower market.
Yeah.
So, you how do you stand out in that type of market if you're offering, all patients can see are a strain name and percentages if they go to like the medbud.wiki site. But other than that, they're completely reliant on what their clinic is telling them to purchase and what those pharmacists are being encouraged to push. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a strange market.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, I mean, German market is growing rapidly. Also, there's not great data here. That was one good thing about the U.S. You had really good data coming out of most states, but both on employment and users and sales and all these different things. And here, it's very difficult to get any information. We actually tried putting out a survey with a couple of partners trying to get some employment information and got almost very little response. Yeah, so we're still looking at how we can get some of that information and start bringing it together because someone's got to do it. But it's difficult. People don't answer surveys, and people don't want to say how many employees they have or what they're paying and things like that. They feel like
because they got to keep up their image.
Yeah. But I mean, Germany. So the numbers are hard to get to, but it was somewhere around probably a little over 200,000 patients when April 1st happened, when the first cannabis legalization law came into effect here in Germany recently, and then supposedly in the first 30 days, it was something like 70,000, 80,000 patients, new patients joined the medical ranks. You had all kinds of different companies and telemedicine companies really pushing these really cheap prescriptions where you could get signed up for like €5 and get your first prescription and things like that. But just in that first month, you probably had a 25 to 35% or something increase in the number of medical patients. Not sure what those numbers have done since then, but the assumption is that it didn't continue to grow as quickly, but still, there's going to be steady growth. So the expectation is that Germany's medical market is going to keep growing and growing significantly here in the next few years. And we'll have to see what happens with the next phase, if we can actually get recreational pilot projects started still this year. That's the goal from the current government before they get voted out at the end of the year. But we're not sure if that will happen or not. But it will be interesting to watch for sure.
Yeah. A few things that I've been kind of wondering about that is that is this going to lead to more pressure on like countries like the UK to start working on more domestic production? Because what I've seen on the patient boards is that the supply chain has really suffered with the increased demand in Germany. Most of the available cannabis is being funneled that way instead of the UK. So every time you go look online to see what products are available, it's hard to have consistency with your prescription because here today, gone tomorrow. It's really being funneled towards where the increased demand is. UK can't compete with Germany at this point. Yeah. And with Germany, I wonder how are we going to respond to the increased demand for cannabis and differentiate between recreational and medical use? If medical use in the bar has been set so low now to access a prescription, and what's going to incentivize them to then go to the social clubs or the cultivation clubs and support their local cultivators, especially if they don't like what's being grown there right now, that stop them from going to, 1-800, cannabis now online like they had in California and just obtaining a prescription, having, choosing your flower variety and having that shipped to your house in the next, 48 hours.
Yeah.
I don't understand how they're going to, combat that issue.
Yeah. I mean, within Germany and throughout Europe, there is still a lot of room to increase the supply. Like a lot of the bigger companies, both the ones that are growing here in Germany, but also in Portugal, they were waiting for the demand to increase before they built new facilities, but they already had plans in place for how to do it, had the money ready and things like that. So I think the industry is going to be able to respond. It still takes a little bit of time. Obviously, it takes 6 months to a year to get a facility up and running. And then licensing, if you're doing GMP, can take just the same amount of time or longer. But GACP, usually your licensing goes pretty fast. But then how do you get a GMP-ified, basically? But there's mechanisms for that too. But so there is a lag. I don't think anyone wanted to put the money into building a facility till that April 1st law really did come in, because until it happens, and so many things kept changing. I don't think anyone wanted to put the money down before sure. If the recreational comes into play, of course, that demand is going to probably skyrocket. But once again, I think there's a lot of capacity to increase. And you mentioned Tilray earlier. They've got facilities down in Portugal, and some of the other big companies do too. And they've got big facilities which have not been used fully, because there just wasn't the demand. So I think you will see a lot more supply coming. Also in Germany now, they've changed the law to where previously only 3 companies could grow in Germany. Now they've already given out licenses to a few more big companies. I think Tilray is one of them. I think Aurora was the other. Could be wrong on that, but so there's two of the biggest companies in Europe already have new licenses to build and grow here in Germany. But like I said, it's going to take a while to see those things come online. But it's coming. And along with that, all the jobs that will be needed, to staff and to man those facilities. So it's definitely going to be great for the job market too.
And that's the side we're on. So with me being in Portugal with Paralab Green, what we do is we're a one-stop shop for equipment. So as there's increased demand for, cultivated, extracted product, there's going to be more of a need for equipment solutions. And primarily, a lot of these have been sourced from North America up until recently, because it's technologies that's used in other sectors, but in order to satisfy some of the regulatory needs for these types of environments, these companies have pivoted and created channels and optimized their solutions for cannabis. So what Paralab Green does is we offer a one-stop shop for all these solutions. So on the cultivation side, we have things to help reduce bioburden in the greenhouse rooms or in the cultivation rooms. We have curing, trimming, sorting, bucking solutions for post-harvest. And from extraction onward, we have everything from, all the different types of extraction methods. So BHO or hydrocarbon, solventless, ethanol, CO2, the distillation, all the way down to packaging. So what we're trying to do is create this space where we can say, we understand that there's already, a burden with outfitting the facility. Instead of having to, go back to the investment fund and look at where you're going to be cutting checks, how about you go to one place? We will vet the producers we'll vet the equipment manufacturers for you, and here's the offering that we have. And we work with the producers on how to reach their production goals, dial in initial parameters if they're just starting out. And we have a really strong technical background. So we're working with everyone from, those who are doing more of the cultivation club up to large commercial growth. But I'd really like to see more craft producers start to emerge and offer that, that sweet spot of more of a craft quality or boutique quality flower to the market. I think both the recreational and the medical consumer would benefit for something like that.
Yeah, I agree. But I think, at least, especially in Germany, but probably throughout Europe, the standards that are put on to the medical side, onto the medical products, are so high that it's difficult to really put out these craft type strains. Because like in Germany, for instance, once you get your product registered, all subsequent batches forever and ever have to be within 10% on the THC level, which is basically not physically normally possible, because there's always going to be some slow drift of your strain. So that THC level is going to slowly drift, whether it's up or down, but it's not going to stay within 10%. Everything changes. So then you have to, do cloning and all these, or tissue. I'm drawing a blank now, but where you save the tissue samples, so then you can regenerate from tissue samples. So you are always really having a true clone, and it's just time and money intensive. But that's what you have to do currently to be able to satisfy those demands from the regulators. Whereas if you have recreational, I would assume that those parameters would fall away, or those rules, with THC level having to always be constant because it's not a medicine anymore, so it doesn't really matter. My guess is it would just have to be what the label says, and within a certain range based on that. That's where it'll be exciting for all the craft, all the different types of craft strains that you could have, and then you can also do more soil growing and things like that. If you're growing in soil or outdoor, it's even more difficult to meet those medical rules, those tight standards. So most companies are forced to do hydroponic growing, which is a great method, but I think you lose some of that interesting input that you get from growing outdoors or growing in soil, because then the plant really takes on some of those characteristics, or if you're growing outdoors, then your elevation and just where you're growing will affect how those plants end up, growing and tasting later. So that's where I think it'll be really interesting when recreational is able to flourish. That I think that's when you start to see all these fun, interesting strains like you have in the U.S. The U.S. I think you have over 7,000 strains available. Yeah, and that's what's available. The growers have probably 100 times of that available, in their seed banks. But yeah, in Europe, you've got, like you said, in the UK, something like 95, and I think in Germany, it might be a little bit more, but you don't have that much variety on the medical market.
Yeah, definitely. And that was one thing I really miss about living in Oregon, was having my own plants. I really loved having my own plants as soon as I could. That's the first thing I did. My dad had been growing for a while, so he immediately just gave me some starters, and I was off to the races with that. And it didn't stop my me going and purchasing from my local producers, but I still had my own material as well. And there was just something nice about feeling like I was, being able to grow. It's like growing your own tomatoes, but instead I got to grow my own medicine. So it was really therapeutic. And I think that everything in Germany and the UK is still in its infancy. If we're comparing, like I said earlier, to California, the medical launched in 1996, and then Washington State was the first to legalize. I believe it was 2012, followed by Colorado. So, we had a lot of time in between where, there was some opportunity to really test things out and grow the market, whereas it was fast tracked between Germany and the UK. UK only made it medically legal in 2018, and already there's just intense pressure to keep up, to understand the market and develop the market. But if you look at it in the grand scheme of things, it hasn't been that long, and it was ultimately legalized in 2018 because of the work done by parents who had children who were critically ill and dependent on it. And now they're completely left in the dust. I know families that have completely had to give up on cannabis as medicine for their epileptic children and go to conventional medicine because the producers who were making medicine for them at first have now completely moved on to the radical market, more of that medical, but they're actually recreational users, which I hope is something that gets addressed as things progress as well, because there's so many areas to focus on in these markets, and there's so much pressure for it to shape and evolve into something, but it really hasn't been that long since it's been medically available.
Yeah. Germany, it's only been since 2017, and that's when Germany's Supreme Court said that it has to be. Supreme Court said it has to be legal and covered by insurance. So, But I lived in Colorado. I think Colorado actually was before Washington by a very short time. I think it was Colorado and then Washington, but same year. I think Colorado was first. But
I thought it was Washington first, followed by Colorado. We'll have to fact check after this.
Yeah, we'll have to check. But I think with
I
Colorado,
lived
then
in
what?
Washington. That's where I was raised. So I'm like, I might just be pro Washington.
I know, and that's why I said, well, I was in Colorado, so that's why I think it was Colorado.
Yeah, I think they were really close. They were like, it
Yeah,
was like back to back.
it was.
Because I was under the impression it was Colorado first too, but then I read the other day that it was Washington first, then Colorado. But I might be wrong.
It was definitely very close. It was
Yeah,
definitely the same year, and I think just months apart. Either way,
yeah.
yeah. So
Find out and then post like something afterwards.
right. Yeah. So you also are involved with a group called Empower, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I've met some of your colleagues from that group also. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and what you guys are doing with that?
Yeah, so Empower is almost a year old. It formed during an event last September, and it just started as a group chat between some of the women who were attending a cannabis conference, and we started adding more people to the group chat, and then next thing we know, it's 3, 4, 5, 600. So I believe now it's at like 650 members, and has evolved onto a Slack channel, and now there's events and such. So it's really blossoming and developing. On the leadership, it's Heidi Whitman, Nora Frobush, and Lisa Haag. So although I created it, I took a step back to fully focus on my move to Portugal because it was a bit unintentional that it grew to the size that it did. So it just needed to take on a life and have some more time and care than I was able to provide it. So since then, the ladies have taken the reins and they're doing, events, and it's a great community for referrals and questions. And it helps us also get women on panels that are merit based
Mm-hmm.
opportunities, not just filling diversity and inclusion, because we feel like that's part of the challenge is that we've seen some events where there's no women speaking, or that there's women being placed, but it's more to hit a goal,
Yeah.
and they might not be the best people to be speaking on those topics. So we also share opportunities for employment throughout the industry as well. But that's mainly like the drive behind it is to you empower women within the community. We call it a Chico system, and also enforce merit-based opportunities so that the people who are, given these opportunities thrive.
Okay. And so if there's some ladies, some women out there who are listening in and are in the cannabis industry, how can they learn more about Empower and how can they get involved with you?
Yeah, so I hope that we'll have my LinkedIn or something posted. If so, you can always reach out to me and I can put you in touch. Or there is a LinkedIn group, the Empower LinkedIn group as well, which is I would say, primary way to access it. And then we share on there the Slack channel information and everything like that, so that you can be a part of it.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think that's very interesting, and certainly back in the U.S., it was very much a old school boys club for the longest time. I think it probably still is, and I think Europe has always been a little bit more advanced when it comes to women in the workplace and things like that than the U.S. And I think I've seen that also certainly in the cannabis industry in Europe, that you have a lot of women in positions of power. So it's great, but I think it's always good to have that extra support. So yeah, it's a great concept. I'm glad you guys are doing that.
So I actually found the experience opposite, and that's kind of why it formed. Was because in the U.S. I worked for two women-owned companies back to back, both focused on cannabis, And I feel like there were some initiatives like the women-owned business initiatives where you get different tax incentives for being a women-owned business. And then there was Women Grow. There were a lot of women-focused initiatives in cannabis very early on in the US, which was really cool. Women Grow was there. I was a part of that. There was a group called Tokeativity, which started in Oregon, which was very focused on women. And that's where Empower Her kind of came about, is that Heidi and I at different conferences were kept meeting up because we were both UK based and saying, where are all the women? And then when we meet up at events, we were like, oh, there's the women. Like, how do we connect? Like, how do we get everyone together? So ultimately that's it. Like it was developed out of a need. And I think that's why so many women flock to the group. And still, even today, a majority of the participants in the group, I would say half, if not more are from the US and looking to connect over in Europe. And we just weren't seeing any sort of group taking initiative over here to do that. But then shortly after we created Empower, we found that there is a similar group in Germany called She Rise, which is doing something similar, which we thought was awesome. So, looking for groups and creating international chapters or relationships and collaborating as a community. But you're right. It was definitely a bit of a boys' club in the US. And I think that comes with the nature of, the business and the risk that went into it from the early days. But there were a lot more women I saw than when I came over to Europe, which I was kind of shocked by. But now that's very quickly changing. I like to think that it has something to do with also Empower and She Rise and reaching out to these events and saying, hey, add some women to these panels. Here are some that we can suggest, and since then we have a lot of the event producers. I would say about 75% of them. There are a few stubborn ones, but the ones who are really focused on, expanding beyond the pay to play speakers are coming to us and saying, who do you suggest? And asking us for input, which is incredible.
Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that, the pay to play, where you're like, oh, we have spots on our panels. Do you want to be a guest? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, okay, for $2,000, you can be on a panel. I'm like, I'm not paying you to go to fill your time slot. I mean, if anything, you should pay me, but I'm not asking for that. But
and attendance is not high enough to meet the cost that it is to not only attend, but then to sponsor for a speaking spot on a topic that you can't guarantee there's going to be many people who are actually that's relevant to.
Right. No, and certainly, like you said, a lot of these events, especially the new ones, the attendance is very small, but they still want the same 2, 3, 4, 5 grand. Sorry. The same 2, 3, 4, 5 grand for you to participate, but the attendance is going to be so small, but versus going to Spannabis or Mary Jane or CannaFest where you've got 50 to 80,000 people and the booth is the same cost. It's like, well, where am I going to put my money? And us as a startup, we're not in a position to support people out of the goodness of our heart. We have to see that we think there's going to be a return on that investment. And certainly many of these smaller ones, it's just the numbers just don't make sense, as much as we'd like to support them. But what we do a lot, though, we do media partnerships with a lot of these events, where we can give them some free publicity and then they give us some free publicity. It's a win-win. And, we feel very strongly that by supporting each other any way we can, that the industry is stronger, so we definitely do that. But as far as being able to just throw money at events, we're not in a position to do that. So
I think that's a lot of people right now. We're all in a holding pattern, waiting to see how these markets are going to continue to develop, right? So I think that for these events, that like where I said with Empower, having an interesting set of panels about topics that are relevant to what's happening right now is incredibly important. We don't want to see the same 4 to 5 speakers at every single show. We're peddling the same topic, which is 90% marketing themselves. I think that it's important to look beyond the monetization of your the sponsors and see what is best for the attendees. If you're thinking about what's going to be most interesting to listen to, that's where I would like to see the trend continue.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's, from a personal point of view, I don't attend all the conferences either, because when I used to go to many more, but like you said, it ends up being the same topic again and again with the same speakers. But in the end, it's almost 95% or more of those speakers, they're just stating their opinion anyway, which you and I have opinions too. We also read what's going on and talk to people. So ours is probably as valid as theirs, because all it is guessing about what's going to happen.
Exactly. It's getting out the crystal ball.
Yeah.
I'd rather walk away feeling educated than feel pitched to.
Yeah.
And I'm not sometimes that being the case.
Yeah. Sometimes it's interesting, and they'll have some people who are directly coming from the government or from some of the political parties who say, they say, I was just in this meeting the other day, and this is what we're discussing. So, they can say that's kind of the insider knowledge of what is being discussed behind closed doors in the government. And you're like, maybe it'll go this direction or something. That is interesting, even though, what happens in a meeting doesn't turn into law or regulations later, but at least it's more interesting to have that insider knowledge versus the same attorney telling us the same thing every time. And it's like, I read the same thing that you do. So.
Yeah, it's a lot of preaching to the converted within the cannabis industry. And some of the most interesting events that I went to in the U.S. were the local legislative meetings, where it was for the Oregon Retailers of Cannabis Association. I'm an ORCA lover, so I was caught by the name because the acronym was ORCA. And then it just happened to be more focused on, policy change. And what we would do is we'd all get together and have someone from the local government come and speak to us and get to know us and get to understand the community, so they could understand where we're coming from when then they're, in session speaking on policy change or analyzing policies to update and having our perspective. So as you and I are talking about the changes in Germany, I think it's going to be important that we start including the local government and on these conversations, giving them some perspective, maybe give them a plant, like something that they have to care for and grow and then understand, but just having them relate a little bit more to the person that is impacted by the policy.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, because each locality also has different things that are important to the communities or potentially different things that can impact the industry. Yeah. So, well, we're coming up on an hour, and so we try and keep this to about an hour or so. Do you have any final words? And also, do you want to let people know, you mentioned about Empower, how people can get in touch with you in general if they want to connect, if they have questions, if they think Paralab Green might be able to help them. If you want to, let people know how they can find you.
Yeah, of course. So I guess my final note is to stay curious, ask questions, do your own research. For those looking to come over for a job, do your own research. Don't rely on one published report. Really analyze the market and understand what you're coming over here to do. Since this is, an employment-focused podcast. About Empower. If you're a woman in the industry and interested in joining Empower, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or Heidi Whitman. We'd be happy to help and happy to connect you. We also have an Empower LinkedIn. I can help with connecting you. And for Paralab Green, if you do need any equipment, we are European-based. We're in Portugal and Spain. It's www.paralab-green.com, or like I said, just reach out to me and I can help you with anything.
Great. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk again today. It was very interesting, very, very interesting. I think, with your perspective from US, UK, now Portugal, all different markets and different stages of development. So yeah, so thank you very much, and definitely let's keep talking about what's going on down there. So thank you everyone for joining us today. You can also visit us if you're interested in getting into the industry. If you're in the industry looking for different opportunities, you can find us at EUCannaJobs.com. You can also follow us on LinkedIn. That's where we actually do updates just about every day and job opportunities. We'll actually list a couple of job opportunities, a few job opportunities at the end of this. So if you stick around for another minute, then you can see some potential jobs in the industry that we're currently trying to fill. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you, Becca. And everyone, please, stay informed, stay connected, and keep exploring the world of cannabis with us. Thank you.